Hey, what's up? Back at you with another video. If you thought the AfriForum and Solidarity are a nuisance, if they've been annoying you going up to the White House trying to get lobbying money from the US to come to South Africa and whispering in Donald Trump's ears to allow Afrikaners to have an express lane to the United States, if you were thinking the whole thing with Orania is getting annoying, hold on to your hat, because here comes Cape Independence, and we're going to be listening to Clement Manyathela, who will be speaking with, I think it's Phil Craig, a well-known influencer, I don't know who he is, from the Cape Independence movement. Actually seems to be leading it. Let's listen to the debate. You're starting to realize, if you're not already, that white people in South Africa are here to stay. They would rather fight to stay here. They'd rather train in camps, the Saidlanders, and do all of these things. They'd rather ask for money to have themselves stay even harder in South Africa, in the Cape, being a country all on its own. Where will all of this go? Do they have a chance of succeeding? Do South Africans not have a right to Cape Town currently as we live? Let's listen and see what all of this is about.
Welcome back. President Cyril Ramaphosa might have to deal with yet another twist in the tale of divisions between South Africa and the US. The Cape Independence Advocacy Group says they intend to meet with White House officials to heighten their call for Cape independence. The leader of the group, Phil Craig, says the presidency, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, and the Western Cape Premier have 7 days to make representations to call a referendum on Cape independence. The group's co-founder, Phil Craig, joins us now for a discussion on this. Phil, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening.
Good evening, Clement. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Why are you trying to get the US to intervene in South Africa's internal affairs?
So in the first instance, we're not particularly trying to get the US to intervene in affairs. We are lobbying internationally, just as the ANC itself lobbied internationally when it had the differences with the apartheid government. And fundamentally, we're an organisation that's existed for a number of years. We are fighting for something that is constitutionally permissible. It's legal, and it's something that will improve the lives of the Western Cape people significantly. And ultimately, we've been advocating for Cape independence for a number of time. We've engaged with many of the political organisations, including the presidency, including the Western Cape Premier. So this isn't something that's new. We want to have a referendum held in the Western Cape to allow the people of the Western Cape themselves to decide democratically, would they like to break away from South Africa? Is that the solution that they collectively want? Or do they want to remain in South Africa? And we have to understand the backdrop of that is, since 1994, the majority of Western Cape voters have never once voted for the ANC, and they've never once been governed at a national level by the government they voted for. So what does Cape independence deliver? It's not some scheme that's behind the scenes. It's really simple. The people of the Western Cape are not being governed by the party they vote for, and Cape independence would allow them to be governed by the party they vote for. And I think that should be understandable for anybody in a democracy.
Yeah, and I really think, Phil, there's fundamental differences between the ANC that negotiates with other countries during a time when there's apartheid in this country, and an organization like yourself that's trying to appeal to the conscience or the influence of other countries outside when there is no necessarily persecution. Apartheid was different times. Of course, it required that the ANC speak to countries outside.
Well, of course, these things are all very, very subjective. Now, apartheid was worse by a degree, but here we are in the Western Cape. The majority of us are ethnic minorities. We're discriminated against by government legislation. We're suffering chronic unemployment. We have, our lives are getting worse. We're getting poorer. So actually, this isn't something we should just write off.
Cue here the statistics I shared recently about Balile Hohla showing white people's employment and maybe even white people's marriages.
Slide 6, because slide 6 is the most telling slide. You see, this particular slide tells the tale of what has happened since 1994 to 2016. I could reproduce this slide for 2024. You can see how this part of colors and blacks got stuck through time. You can see how that slide grew. You see, that's growth.
And who does that represent?
That's white, and this is India.
Right.
And Indians are catching up. And why are they catching up? Because they did something in 1953 when Peru did what it did. Now you can see how this. So blacks are stuck, the gramophone.
Yeah.
And they play the record when it has a groove. This is what is happening to the colors and the blacks. This is the people that are skilled in the workforce. The proportion of the skilled in the workforce is a proportion of their own population group. It's stuck. When it's stuck like that, it cannot go forward. Absolutely not. And this is what has been the return for democracy. It was not only democratic dividend, it was also a demographic dividend. For blacks and colors, it's been disaster.
It seems there's a success going on over there, but he's talking about chronic unemployment for the white people. Did he say for the white people?
this isn't something we should just write off because the ANC isn't quite as sinister as the National Party. I happily concede that. But the South African national government has performed absolutely terribly, abysmally, and people are suffering hugely. And we want to find solutions. We want to find democratic solutions. So we don't have to be absolutely as bad as apartheid to say, well, look, hang on a second, there's a problem here, and we're perfectly entitled. And actually, I'll just correct you on something you said. We haven't asked the president and the premier and the minister for a referendum in 7 days. What we've said to them is, we want to go overseas. We believe we're constitutionally entitled to do so. But actually, out of fairness and transparency, we're writing to you to say, if you want to suggest that we're not within our legal rights, you've got 7 days to say so. And tellingly, none of them have, because we're not outside our rights. We're perfectly entitled to go and do this in a democracy.
Okay, so I'm glad you realize that the comparison is quite flawed between what the ANC did during apartheid and what you're doing now. You've just mentioned now that you are facing chronic unemployment. What numbers do you have that we don't have? Because my understanding, having looked at Stats SA, is that unemployment is more rife among the black population and not among the white population. Even if I can take 50,000 white people in the Western Cape against 50,000 black people there, the numbers will tell that specific story. Do you want to share with us the numbers that demonstrate that chronic unemployment amongst white people in the Western Cape?
Well, look, so first of all, and I think this is a really good example of the problems in South Africa, you've instantly gone to black and white. This has got absolutely nothing to do with black and white. I'm talking about the Western Cape people. The Western Cape people, the largest group are coloured, the second largest group are black, and the smallest group are white. So you're making the assumption that we're fighting for Cape.
Hey, yo, this is how we talk in South Africa. Is it weird to Americans, really? Is it weird to South Africans? Whenever we speak about who we are, do we not speak demographics and statistics? Do the statistics not matter? When we mention them, aren't we being scientific? Aren't we citing something other than opinions coming out of our own heads? Isn't that a scholarly, educated, academic thing to do? To cite where you got your information from. What's your pain point? How long is it? How heavy is your pain? How much medication do you need administered to solve it? So when we talk about that, are we being racist? I'm detecting and coming across people who really feel offended by facts about the makeup of South Africans. When a white man cries about unemployment, of course you look at him, you realize that he's white. He's lying about that experience. He's the most employed being in South Africa currently. So the response to that is, but wait, not you. Somebody else can cry about that. And with them having all of these issues of unemployment and issues with the governing party, why don't those people decide they also want to leave and form their own country? What gives you the reason to say that you want to seize? You're living in luxury. Look at your house. Look at yourself. Look at how thick and nice and fat and pink you are. You're eating very well. You're well off. So Clement's response is offensive. I just want to know if it really is offensive to you. Tell me if it is. I'll learn to understand that there are people who are offended by these truths.
Independence for white people, but we absolutely aren't. I authored the Western Cape People's Bill, which very clearly talks about those three racial groups all collectively making up the Western Cape people as established in the Western Cape Constitution. And what do we have in the Western Cape? We've got an unemployment rate of 20%. Now that's half the rate in South Africa, which is a feather in the cap of the Western Cape, but more than double the G20 average. So here we are in a situation where the Western Cape, 1 in 5 people in the Western Cape are needlessly unemployed as a result of government policy for a government that the people of the Western Cape have voted against for 30 years. This is surely understandable. And actually, why do we always have to go to race? It's exactly the issue. Isn't South Africa supposed to be a non-racial country? That is one of the things that we're fighting for. We want a non-racial country. It's all right for the president to talk about, hang on a second, we want non-racialism. But actually, we've got more race laws now than at any time during apartheid.
So sorry, Craig, are you saying that the Western Cape has the highest levels of unemployment? The last I checked, we were looking at the Eastern Cape, the Northwest. Is that the numbers that you have, that the Western Cape actually has the highest levels of unemployment?
No, that's not what I said at all. I said South Africa has got 40%, just over 40%. It's 41.6 at the expected rate, and the Western Cape's at 20. What I said is that the Western Cape is half of South Africa's number because it's better governed, but it's double the average of G20. In other words, it's good, but it's better than the rest of South Africa, but it's still absolutely terrible by any international measure, and that's a result of national government economic policy.
Okay, so the Western Cape doesn't have chronic unemployment compared to other provinces in South Africa.
Well, it's got chronic unemployment, 20% absolutely is
compared to other provinces.
The other provinces are worse.
Okay, cool.
It's got chronic unemployment.
Yeah. So, but when you say we've got chronic unemployment here, that's a suggestion that you're making. So you do understand that there are other provinces actually that are suffering the highest levels of unemployment, far worse than the Western Cape.
But what is the point you're trying to make, Clement? You're trying to suggest that we in the Western Cape should put up with 20% unemployment because actually it's worse in the rest of the country because there it's even worse governed than here. We want to be well governed. Limpopo, with the best will in the world, elected the ANC. KZN elected, or now almost MK. The Eastern Cape elected the ANC. So if they're really badly governed because the national government is enacting terrible economic policy, at least they voted for it. Here in the Western Cape, we didn't.
Yeah.
We didn't.
Well, I'm not suggesting that you have to put up with it. I'm just trying to correct what you're saying so that the viewers don't get the wrong message. When you are creating an impression that you're going to run to the US to engage Trump because you want Cape independence, and one of the issues you are dealing with is the chronic unemployment, the suggestion there is that it is that bad in the Western Cape that it requires another government to intervene. I want the viewers to understand that that's not the case. When you talk about chronic unemployment, that is not in comparison to other countries, to other provinces in the country. And that's similar to the point AfriForum was making about farm murders. Yes, there are farm murders, but the impression they're trying to create is that for some reason white people are under siege, when in fact, when you look at the numbers, that is not the case. It's people who live in farms who get killed, who are victims of crime. So I want the viewers to get that. How are you going to move around the constitution here? Because this doesn't align.
Hold on. Clement is asking some pretty nice questions. Is the Cape and those who want to leave, exit, are they wanting to leave because they are better than South Africa and now they'd like to fence a particular privilege into its own country? Are they saying they want to be separate because they see themselves to be well off and distinct and not needing South Africa? Or are they saying they're leaving because unemployment is high and so they are leaving because things are bad, or they're leaving because things are good? If you're saying things are bad, then others have them worse. So can you really leave because things are bad for you? Then that leaves the other hand. You're leaving because you're privileged. You want to be special. You want to be the French Riviera. You want to be Monaco. The houses in Cape Town are eye-wateringly expensive. I watch real estate tours from Americans who will come to South Africa to go and look at 100 million rand real estate over there. Ines Yilmazer is one of them.
With our democratic values, we are a democratic society that embraces a singular, non-racial society. So which part of the constitution, in your understanding, allows for such a cessation from South Africa?
Okay, well, first of all, let's just dispel some myths. We're not a non-racial country. We're a deeply racialized country. We've got 142 race laws. We have BE, we have affirmative action, we have race quotas in sport. We absolutely are not a non-racial country. We're a deeply racialized country. So let's get that absolutely straight to start off. Now, you asked me where in the Constitution do we get this right from? Well, in a number of places. First and foremost, Section 235, the right of self-determination. The right of self-determination for the South African people as a whole does not preclude other groups. So that there you can start. And you can also go to international law. The right of self-determination is a fundamental principle of international law, which South Africa has repeatedly sworn to uphold since 1994. And the ANC are outspoken supporters of self-determination for Palestine, for the Western Sahara. So the ANC support self-determination. The South African Constitution enables self-determination. So if the Western Cape people come along and say we'd like to enact our right to self-determination, what constitutional barrier exists to stop them?
I mean, if you're so confident that the Constitution allows for it, why haven't you gone straight to the Constitutional Court to see that realized? Have you ever tried that?
But what would we go to the Constitutional Court for at this point? And the first thing we need to do is have a referendum to determine the democratic will of the Western Cape people. The Constitutional Court has certified Section 235. I can talk you through the certification. It's a very significant note, but at this point it's irrelevant because the first step in the process is to establish the democratic will of the Western Cape people, which should happen in a referendum, which the DA promised to call and then went back on their word, with the Constitution allows. And our first port of call is to try and force a referendum on Cape independence. And actually, that is probably the primary objective that we have going overseas, to raise funding to help us to work towards that referendum and to see if we can get political pressure placed on the Western Cape government to call the referendum, because right now the Western Cape Premier is defeating democracy in the Western Cape by deliberately not calling a referendum that the majority of people in the Western Cape want.
Where in the Constitution, though, does it talk about cessation? Because the Constitution when it talks about the right to self-determination, it doesn't explicitly define in fact a single section. I'm not seeing anywhere where it talks about cessation. In fact, if anything, it looks at the right of all people to freely determine their political status, to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Where in that section of the Constitution do you think your call for cessation is justified?
So self-determination is a right that attaches to all people. Secession is the ultimate.
Can Cape Town exercise its will to have their own currency? Can they say to the United States, we'd like to be part of the dollar. We'd like to now, going forward, cease from using the rand, and our currency will be the dollar. People paying in taxes will be paying in US dollars. Does the Constitution envisage the cessation of people towards a foreign currency when it says people have a right to self-determination? Is it that extreme? Is he stretching it?
Measure of self-determination. There is no absolute right to independence. There's a right to self-determination, and that becomes context specific. So what would happen? What would be the legal process here? The Western Cape Premier would call a referendum. If the Western Cape people then vote in favour of Cape independence, the Western Cape Premier or the Western Cape government would then be obliged to negotiate with the South African government for its independence. And then you start to fall into the precedents of international law, which would be the classic precedents would be the Quebec judgment, the ICJ's Kosovo judgment, and the UK Scotland judgment, and there's form there which effectively says both those parties must negotiate in good faith because the Western Cape people have a right to self-determination, which may be exercised in the form of secession or in other forms. But let's remember, lesser forms will be things like devolution. And so for two points on self-determination. First of all, it's an undeniable right. The South African government is prohibited from international law from saying no. You cannot say no to self-determination. And the lowest form of self-determination is autonomy, devolution of powers. Now here the Western Cape were elected wanting the devolution of police and rail. And the national government is refusing to give the Western Cape devolved powers, even though they've asked for it. So arguably, the national government is already in default of international law by not listening to the Western Cape people. Now, ironically, the Western Cape government isn't pressing this issue. I wish it would. I actually have lobbied long and hard with the Western Cape government to assert the right to self-determination. That's why we wrote the Western Cape People's Bill, because they can claim those things by right. But anyway, that's an aside at this point. We need a referendum.
Okay, cool. We clearly understand that constitution differently, but I'd leave it there. I feel. Did you, because it always feels to me like you probably, let me ask it this way. Did you contest elections?
That's right. Well, so the referendum party contested elections, but we must understand that elections and referendums are very different things. They're both separately in the Constitution because they're completely separate things. So yes, we did contest elections.
Okay, how much support did you get when you contested?
We contested elections to try and force the Western Cape Premier to call a referendum. We didn't contest the elections to hope to get a majority.
I hear that, Phil. I want the listeners to understand. So you contested elections. How much support did you get in the province, and how much support did you get nationally?
So look, so we got about 5,100 votes in the Western Cape, and we got about collectively 7,200 unique votes. Outside of in the national ballot, we got about 4,000 votes. So we didn't get enough votes to force the Western Cape government to call a referendum. So at this point in time, that was our first outing. We were a 6-month-old party, and obviously we'll continue with that. But we're using all the means at our disposal to try and get a referendum in the Western Cape.
You didn't scratch the surface. So in percentage point, let me get the viewers to understand. 0.26% of the provincial vote, 0.02% of the national vote. What does that tell you? So if you are an organization that is premised on Cape independence, this is something that you have spoken about as an organization. When you go campaign, you have to seek and want to appeal to the people who can resonate with your message. What does this support base tell you about your message and whether or not it resonates with people of the Western Cape?
Well, look, I guess here's the question of do you want to know the answer or not? So let me rather go back to you and say, look, what did polling say was going to happen? The overwhelming majority of people in the Western Cape who want Cape independence vote for the DA. That's a fact that's been established in every single poll. So we've got two things that we know from polling. The majority of people in the Western Cape favour a referendum being held. That we've had that consistently across all of our polls. And the majority of Cape independence supporters vote for the DA. And what did polling say was going to happen? That all those Cape independence supporters weren't going to vote for us. They were going to vote for the DA. We tried to change that reality and we didn't. But we can't pretend that they don't exist, that they're just voting for the DA.
But why are they not voting for you? If you're a party that wants to see a referendum, if truly what you're claiming is true, that the majority of people in the Western Cape want to see a referendum, you're a party that advocates for that. Why are they not voting for you? You got 0.2% nationally. You got 0.26% provincially. That's a dismal failure. That's a message to you that message you claim resonates clearly doesn't.
No, well, clearly, surely you can understand the difference. So first of all, I'll come back to that point. They are separate things in the Constitution. On an election, you vote across a range of issues for who you want to run your province. I don't blame people for thinking, hang on a second, this small, tiny, 6-month-old party isn't the party that's right for running the Western Cape. We tried to get a protest vote. The majority of people voted for the DA because they thought the DA were the party that was best equipped to run the Western Cape. And that's what they voted for. A referendum is something very, very different. That's why in international law, in international norms, independence questions are decided in a single question referendum, which is not party political. It takes party politics out of it. You don't vote across a range of issues. You vote on one specific issue. Do you want Cape independence or not? That's how it works all around the world, and that's how we want it to work here. And when we poll consistently, every single time, the majority of people in the Western Cape want a referendum to be held.
And yet they don't vote for the same party that wants the same referendum. Okay, what exactly do you want Donald Trump to do?
So we want to get some financial support so that we can run a more comprehensive campaign. So that we can.
You see that the white people want financial support to stay. They're not going anywhere. They're stuck in this country, ladies and gentlemen. You know, they're stuck in this country. And they're welcome to be stuck over here. As long as they're not racist, they are citizens, they can live here. You understand? So the bluff is finished. You can't have one movement that says, let's leave with the Cape. We're staying in Africa, on African soil. We ain't going nowhere. And one that says, come be refugees in the United States. It's incongruent. It's silly. The white powers that be have played themselves into a corner with these tricks. I understand Cape Independence have had a more organized attempt to achieve this, but criticism in this regard should go to Donald Trump, who said, let's go, come to my country. And seems people aren't interested. And I hear that there's about 75,000 white people or Afrikaners who have expressed leaving to the United States. I saw some headlines passing by, and I think I'll watch the video but not react to it. I am curious to make a documentary to follow a family to the United States as they leave. I want to see some Afrikaners. I want to travel with them. I want to stay with them or cover them as they wrap up their life over here, as they get their documentation, and as they land in the United States. I'd like to be following that. I think I should pitch that maybe to a channel or something like that to really see how they settle over there, man. Y'all are South Africans.
Campaigns so that we can be more effective, and we want the US to place diplomatic pressure onto the Western Cape government to say, hey, you're standing in the way of democracy, and we want you to consult the Western Cape people and allow them to express their democratically will freely, as they should be able to do in a democracy.
Well, the president spoke about your citizenship. Just lastly, Phil, you are a permanent resident, right? You're not a citizen yet of this country.
Sure, that's correct, yes.
Is this something that you would do in your birth country of Britain? And how do you respond to people who argue that here's a man who's come from Britain, who's not even a citizen fully of this country yet, and here he is sowing these divisions and wanting to go to another country to claim to represent citizens of this country, and in that process is sowing divisions and wants another government to interfere in our internal affairs?
Well, so as usual, I would say that this is political rhetoric, and I think the fact that the president has chosen to play the man and not the ball speaks volumes. And there's a lot of facts that either he doesn't yet know or he hasn't made clear, including the fact that I'm entitled to citizenship. I'm trying to attain citizenship, and actually I've got a court order which the Department of Home Affairs is in default over around my citizenship. So there are a number of issues there which certainly haven't come out to the light. I don't want to get sidetracked onto those issues. One of the things I think is far more important, because it's not about me. In a referendum, it's about 3.2 million voters. So if you focus on me, you've missed the point. But here the president says, why does this person come to South Africa? Well, the departure point is fundamentally wrong. When I came to South Africa and invested all my life's work and wealth in South Africa, before I married a South African, had South African children, set up my businesses here, ultimately I came here under Thabo Mbeki, where we had this really well-run country with strong economic growth, low unemployment, and everything was moving forward. After that, we had Jacob Zuma, we had state capture, we had increases in race-based policy. And so the question should be, me, what on earth has turned this foreign investor who came here and fell in love with this country, somebody who wants Cape Independence, and perhaps the president should just turn the camera around 180 degrees and start asking himself, what am I doing as the president that's making something like this guy?
So the president must ask themselves why this investor came here and now they've been put off and he has to do the things that are right to appease the investor. What about the poor black person on the ground? That's why I asked the question. Those who are poor and sick of the ANC, what is their option to seize? To cessation. I don't know what the wording is. Why is cessation seeming like it's tied to privilege? Comes with having the ability to force a referendum, having to force Cape Townians to come out and express whether they want to go further out into the sea or remain where they are.
Something like this guy suddenly gets so determined to fight for this issue for his family and other people's family. How badly have I treated his family to make them want to fight like this?
Have you ever thought of going back to Britain at some point if you're so unhappy about how things are being done here, instead of wanting to push a particular province to somehow...
Ooh, he can't wait to answer that question. He's boiling. Look at his color just turned.
the larger country of South Africa.
Have you ever thought how racist it is for people to keep saying, why, if you don't like it, leave? I'm here. I'm entitled to be here. My wife is South African. She's 10th generation. My children were born here. They don't know any other country. They're Afrikaans speaking. They go to an Afrikaans school. So actually, I find it very offensive when people start saying, as soon as I don't like your political views, have you thought of going home? Have you thought of leaving the country, Clement? If you don't like my views, do you want to leave? And am I saying to you, why don't you leave?
Not at all. So if I don't like this country, if I feel like the province that I am part of, somehow I don't want it being part of a larger South Africa, I am going to consider leaving this country instead of trying to force my opinion on people. And I'll say force, Phil, because there's no evidence that suggests that the people have voted that they want a cessation of the Western Cape from South Africa.
Yeah, why not take Trump's offer? That's his question. Why do you find that question racist? You're the one who said that people bring race into everything. And you're being asked the question, why do you not personally make the choice to move your kids to another school, to another hemisphere, where there's tropical weather or something, where there's a higher employment? How about the United States of A? And you respond saying that that is so racist. How about you leave? And now Clement is telling you that's exactly what I would do. Ooh, man, Clement, you too hard, man.
South Africa. Hence the question I'm asking you. I honestly don't mean it in an offensive way. I just want to know, is that not a consideration to you if you're so unhappy here? Now you are wanting people to take a political posture of, let's move away from South Africa, when this is a country that we've built that is non-racial, that lives in a constitutional democracy. And if that doesn't serve you, and if that doesn't serve me, nothing stops us from deciding to pack up and leave.
My family are multi-generation South African. I've become South African. This is our home. We're going nowhere. What we want to be. I'm not trying to force my views on anybody. Remember,
He's not going anywhere. So the whites are here to stay, y'all. Everybody else who's now busy going on podcasts saying, we need to keep whites. We need to keep whites. There's been this black infantilizing and white aggrandizing thing that's been going on lately. I think people have been paid to do that, man. And so we done dealt with it here.
Calling for a referendum. And I would say to you, I'm willing to have a referendum and allow the people to decide for themselves. It's the government that doesn't want to ask the people. Let's ask them, and then the matter's solved.
Phil Craig, thank you so much for speaking to us on Face the Nation tonight. After the break, how do we navigate these tough diplomatic waters? Paulo Jordan was the chair of the ANC's International Relations Subcommittee.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think. I'll be seeing you next time.